when I admit people.
Cool. Okay. Perfect. Yeah, that's recording now. I can see it.
All right. Okay. So I'm going to start admitting people, and then I will go into the introduction.
Perfect. Looks good. Feels great.
All right. So yeah, people are joining. Right. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Patty Tsai, and I am the Senior Associate Director for CAA Arts Access. Today, we are thrilled to take a virtual visit to Massey Klein Gallery, located in the Lower East Side of Manhattan. Our hosts today are the founders of the gallery, Ryan Massey and Garrett Klein, who will take us through the exhibitions, followed by a talk with artist Bethany Czarnecki, who is also joined today. And Bethany is a graduate of Barnard College class of 2003. You will have an opportunity to ask questions during the Q&A portion. We ask that you be muted during this time and send any questions into the Q&A box, the chat box, located at the bottom of your screen. Now over to Ryan and Garrett, who will tell us about their background and more about the gallery.
Thank you, Patty, and thanks to everyone joining. We're so glad to have you here. Of course, we wish it could be in person, but we will make do with what we've got. So, like Patty said, my name is Ryan Massey. My husband, Garrett Klein, and I run the Massey Klein Gallery. We are on Forsyth Street in the Lower East Side of New York City. We have a 1-year-old who will be joining us for the tour, so apologies if you hear any laughs or shrieks. But overall, I think he's a good critic of the arts, so we'll go with what he says. So today I'm going to take you on a tour of 2 different exhibitions, and you will also hear from Bethany Czarnecki and my husband Garrett Klein. They'll do a tour and further discussion of Bethany's solo exhibition. So in this room, you will see our exhibition titled Elemental. This exhibition includes artwork by Claire Lieberman and Louis Rep. Louis is an artist based in the Netherlands, and Claire Lieberman is an artist who is based in Illinois. Now I'm going to start by describing the work that you see by Louis Rep, and then I will speak about the sculptures that are on view. So this painting is called Untitled. It is by Louis Rep, and he created 3 panel paintings for this exhibition, as well as 3 intimate works on paper. Louis uses found vintage books that he deconstructs and then reassembles to create these works on paper. And an interesting fact about the works on paper that you see on view are they actually mirror 3 of the paintings that are also on view in Elemental. So if you look at Louis's work, you'll see very striking graphic geometric images. The artist, his process is very, it's interesting and it's quite unique. What he does is he will cut out his panel in the desired shape. He builds it so the panel is actually 3-dimensional. It works as a sculpture and a painting. After he's figured out the composition and the overall shape of the panel, he then masks off areas. You'll see that this is the unpigmented wood. The darker areas are actually soil that the artist has rubbed in with a medium. So it's now created an archival. So his work is very interesting because environmental. The material that the wood was grown in has actually become a material that basically decorates the panel. So again, with this example, this painting is also called Untitled. You'll see that the artist has again worked with the overall shape, then he cuts out and builds up, and the last step is rubbing in soil into the panel. And I find there's a real intimacy to this artist's work. You'll see in the areas that have the soil, it enhances the grain of the wood, which I think almost acts like a brush stroke, even though the artist is not using any brush tools. So now I'll talk to you about the sculptures that are in the front room. The two sculptures are black marble, and they are by Claire Lieberman. So Claire hand carved these sculptures. The actual material is called Belgian black marble. And that type of marble is quite rare. It's one of the darkest marbles. You'll find it almost exclusively has no inclusions. Sometimes there'll be tiny little fossilized inclusions, but on the whole, Belgian black marble is almost completely black. So this sculpture right here is titled Fluffy, which when looking at a black marble bomb-esque sculpture, you wouldn't necessarily think of it being fluffy. This title is really representative of the artist's overall practice. She likes to really incorporate into her sculptures. She plays with the idea of weaponry and violence and associates it to play, really as a commentary on how violence is so prevalent in everyday life. So now let's go into the middle room. I'll show you two more works that are on view, and then we'll go into Bethany Czarnecki solo. So this is the third panel painting that's on view by Louis Red. Again, the artist has found the geometry he'd like to use. He cuts out, which he leaves this really nice negative space that again acts as part of the painting. I really like this piece because it plays with so much positive and negative, and then again you get this pseudo brushwork that really is just from the soil being ground in. And paired with this is another sculpture by Claire Lieberman. This one is titled Bunny Bomb, and again you've got this funny play with the title, and the artist is almost combining a grenade-like body with two floppy ears of a bunny. And I really enjoy this work. I find it very unique because there are two tiny inclusions. Again, that I mentioned, Belgian black marble is almost exclusively black. But then every now and then you get these beautiful little surprises of the white stripes. So that was Elemental. With that show, we were really playing with the idea of minimalism and how artists working in different mediums can play with that, as well as geometry and form. So now I'll take you to the back room where we have the Anya Moss solo by Bethany Czarnecki. What we'll do is I'll give you a very quick sweep of the room, and then we'll turn it over to Bethany and Garrett to talk about the show. So come with me. So in this room, Garrett's panning over so you can get a quick view of the paintings. There's 5 paintings and 1 intimate framed work on paper. And as Garrett and Bethany talk about the work, they will describe the artist's process, her inspiration, how the title came about, and just the overall works that were created for this show. So without further ado, thank you again. It was nice to meet you guys, and I'll go ahead and turn the show over to Garrett and Bethany.
Hello, I'm Garrett Klein, husband of Ryan Massey. We run the gallery, as she said. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you, Bethany, for being here. We're very excited to talk more about your work and to unpack some of the details behind these paintings and your process. I'd like to quickly note that the exhibition is available to view on our website, where you can also sign up for our mailing list or take a free tour of the exhibition. I'd like to thank Patty and the Columbia team for organizing the event today. So Bethany, could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So I'm Bethany Czarnecki, and I graduated from Barnard College in 2003. And this is enouement. It's a collection of works, 5 paintings and a work on paper that are all being shown together that I made pretty quickly, most recently during isolation. They're recent paintings of mine, so we can kind of jump into more.
Sure, yeah. So how did you, well, we've been planning the show for about a year.
Yes.
Just to give full context for everything. So what was it like working on these? And then how did you ultimately decide on which paintings you wanted to exhibit? Like, what did that whole process look like?
Yeah, so as Garrett mentioned, the show was on the calendar about a year in advance, and I had started a whole body of work for the remainder of 2019 and early 2020 for the show, with the show in mind. And then in mid-March, when we all found ourselves sort of at home, living in a completely new environment with a lot on our minds and a lot of uncertainty, I found myself completely disconnected from all of the work I had started for the show. I could not find my rhythm. I could not identify with the work. And it was a bit perplexing to me, you know, to kind of go into a studio environment every day and try to work on something that just wasn't resonating with me. So with that, I decided to just embark on all new work for the show. And also too, you know, I wasn't sure if the show would be up. I didn't know if the show would go on, if we would install it. I didn't know if people would be able to come and engage with the work in person. And, you know, I think for me as a painter, you know, the painting for me is how I can sort of communicate and express my thoughts, not just with myself, but with others, with the world, right? Paintings can be interpreted, you know, by anyone, anywhere. And so I was really thinking a lot about that, and if they would be seen, if they would be reflected upon, and in what manner, what would that look like, whether it be virtually or in person. So yeah, so I created all new paintings in that time, and it was an interesting time. I'm a mom of 3. I have 3 young children, and I paint my studios in my home. So I was very fortunate in the regard that I had access to all of my materials during quarantine and during isolation. Many artists, you know, did not. So for me, it really was a blessing that I had access to everything, and I was able to start a new body of work. So yeah, so during that time, I really reflected upon the moment that we were in as a collective, but then also the moment I was in as an individual, as a woman, as a mother, you know, what the juxtaposition of those roles are, and relating to, you know, my family, but then also the larger, you know, community. And so the work was pretty rapid. You know, I would say out of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, out of these paintings here, the one right behind me, directly behind me, and then another painting that we can maybe scan over in a little while, were quite quick, and they were paintings that I made in a very condensed period of time, but also with a lot of clarity. And for me, they brought a lot of hope for me. Like I at that, you know, in March and April and May, I was really yearning for hope and optimism and beauty. And so, you know, when I would go to the studio every day, it was sort of my way of making space for creativity and making space for hope, and creating a pause to reflect on just what we all were going through. really, and how I could help maybe bring some beauty and some hope to others.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah. And just to give us some context on how you're treating all of the canvases, how do you start a canvas? How do you start working on something?
Yeah, so you know, most paintings originate through an emotion or through a perspective. They all are very feminine centric. So the work, you know, most of the work, almost all, are some abstraction of the female form and sort of the role of the female. A lot of them translate to motherhood or birthing, you know, in like a physical sense. And then some are more sensual and have aspects of landscape as well. You know, and I do incorporate the color and the line work and light. And so most of the canvases, I just jump right in. Occasionally I'll do a rough sketch on canvas. I very seldomly start with a drawing or a smaller work on paper and then translate that to a painting. However, that being said, I am doing more work on paper, especially during COVID, because the turnover is just nice and quick, and it is a bit freeing. So most paintings start with an idea in mind of the composition, and then I slowly build up layers and layers upon layers of oil paint, varying lightness and opaqueness, and really paying attention to the relationship of colors and how they sort of communicate with one another, how layering certain colors and hues bring out different sheen and glow and just overall evoking a sense of feeling. I mean, for me, I think, you know, I like the work to kind of put me back in my own space, bring me into my own mind, into my own body. And I hope that the viewer has that same feeling. I want the work to be experiential. So when you are in front of the paintings, that you are experiencing being present with yourself, that they're a bit dreamlike or atmospheric in nature.
Yeah, so far the feedback that I've had from visitors, they're very calming to look at. So I think, yeah, that is coming from the paintings and from the place that you just mentioned.
And one thing I'll add too is I paint these very slowly. So even though, you know what I mentioned, I made these 5 paintings in a condensed period of time, the act of actually painting them is quite slow. So the brush itself, I move very slowly with the brush in order to get the line work and really just the texture that you see in the work and the varying hues. So it is a very slow process. There's very little quickness of brush in the paintings, although some of them are introducing more gestural strokes, which I find kind of refreshing. And I think probably too is also a result of maybe feeling stifled in COVID and isolation, where I wanted to maybe be more free with my gestures and expressive.
Yeah, I mean, I like the contrast with those marks that you're just saying, that some areas of the canvas are very smooth, some have the fade that you kind of do, and then others have these gestural brush strokes. I think it adds a wonderful tension to the works. Now, give us an idea, like when you're working on these, do you work on them flat, do you work on them standing up, on easel?
Yeah, so I work on most of the canvases 360 degrees. So I just turn them constantly. I'm constantly rotating the canvases. I would say about 80% of the work is done horizontally on a table. Occasionally, some of the edges I'll do vertically up on a wall. I love the edges of canvases. I like to frame the picture plane. That's something I've always been drawn to, especially like framing. Right over here. So framing, you know, the plane and really focusing on the voluminous, abstractive, feminine form in the center of these canvases, and then creating a framework around them with various lines, textures, and colors. So the other thing about the work that I find kind of fascinating, and as a result, I believe, of how I work on these, is that there very rarely do I start a painting with the intent of them being shown vertically or horizontally. Most of the work, I just go at it round and round and rotating and you know, kind of create a dialogue with the painting, and by the end of it, when I feel it's complete, then I'll look at the different orientations and decide what feels right to me. However, that being said, and as we both know, they can be installed vertically or horizontally, and I think that's something that I kind of also like to leave some of that decision-making process to ultimately where the painting resides. So, you know, some of them I find are a little bit more direct, like the painting behind us, but others are quite nuanced in that regard.
Mm-hmm. I'm just going to pan really quickly so you guys can see the painting that Bethany was just talking about.
So this is one painting with an example of like a bit more gestural work, where I got looser with the brush, but then also like these oscillating voluptuous female forms. And then just varying texture and tone and lightness. This is an element that I do like to incorporate in my paintings, this idea of lightness and how it sort of migrates through the work and through the composition, whether it's in an active state or more in just an ambient state. And that's something I really think, as I work further along, that's something I'd like to continue to highlight in the work. Yeah, so this is a good example of that.
And that was also a really fun aspect of curating and hanging the show with you here in the gallery is I know that you already had envisioned which orientation these pieces would be hung in,
Right.
And the reason why we ultimately chose the way we did is because there is a certain dialogue between them, a certain narrative that can be clear or then made up to be a little bit more ambiguous and kind of flow through the space in an interesting way. And I think that for abstract painting that is evoking physical object, good, things like that, it's very interesting dialogue to consider with the paintings. Now, talking about making the paintings, let's kind of talk about your studio. Do you have like a set schedule when you go into the studio, or is it a little bit more organic?
It's organic.
Okay.
You know, given that I do paint, my studio is in our home, and I have 3 children, so you know, this is a time where you know, during quarantine, I was homeschooling our children and creating work for the show, and so in a way, it was at times very chaotic, I'm not gonna lie. And you know, you have to embrace that. And then at times, you know, I think I wouldn't have had it any other way for making the body of work, because the body of work, the narrative is so inherent in femininity and women and the duality of the role. And so I kind of was confronted with that on a daily basis, with sort of what I had to do within the home on different levels. So on average, I would say I'm in the studio by 11 a.m., 12 p.m. And you know, I would paint until about dinner time. Now that's during like kind of an unusual circumstance. So during COVID, and so I would get a later start and I would work later. And then on average, I'm in the studio about 6 days a week.
Okay.
Yeah, but now, you know, it's like, it's a normal environment. I'm there 9 a.m. until about 3 p.m. So the hour shift, but on average, like,
pretty good solid schedule, chunk of the day for 6 days a week.
Yes, but I would say I'm about averaging between 30 and 40 hours a week.
Okay, that's a good discipline. And so you are a self-taught painter, but you do have this sort of fairly rigorous painting schedule. This is part of your everyday life.
It is.
And I think what struck me about the work, because Ryan and I met Bethany, you I think came to visit the gallery one day. Had a kind of conversation with Ryan, and we just became aware of your work that way and started following you. And such an interesting thing for me with your work is the color, because so like I'm an artist as well, and the moment I learned about color, which was in college, was just like opened so many doors to me, but I had to be taught that from a professor. And you're doing those things without that sort of formal training and
Thank you.
opening to color. So can you talk maybe a little bit, it's sort of a two-part question.
Okay.
First part's about color, second part's about school and education. So tell us how you see color and how,
Sure.
You said you're really not planning the composition.
No,
so
it's
much,
all
right?
intuitive. So my color choosing in a work is intuitive.
Okay.
I think, as probably many artists can attest, I think you go into a work with a preconceived notion of the outcome, but then once you start the dialogue, it never ends the way you anticipated it to. So, and that's, I think, for me, like, that's what I love so much about painting, right, is the journey of that, the unexpected. But yes, to answer your question, I taught myself to paint with oils. You know, as a child, painting was always in the periphery of my life. I always loved to be creative and paint. I have no formal training. I studied sociology at Barnard. And then I went on to work in finance for over 10 years, and then started painting full-time about four years ago. And so over the past 3 years, I would say the practice has become quite regimented and ritualistic in nature, where I've really hyper-focused on color, the relationship of color, and you know, it's intuitive. I think I look at a lot of art. I always have.
You can definitely tell that just by like me looking at the paintings, like that you're definitely looking at a lot of art.
I am, and but I'm also looking at, I'm looking at my surroundings. I'm absorbing what's around me. We live, we live in nature. We're in Connecticut and by the beach, and so I'm outdoors a lot, and that's an important element to the work, I think. But I also lived in Manhattan for many years as well. So, I'm constantly taking in like the sensory element of things, and then kind of translating that with color. And I like, color is something that can really awaken people, whether it be emotionally, spiritually, physically. And I think that's really important, at least for me. Like, it's done a lot personally, on a personal note. It's been very cathartic for me. It's been something, painting this work and exploring the use of color and the relationship of color has really helped craft how I see the people in my life, my relationships, my interactions with people. So it's a super useful tool, and I think I probably would love to maybe do a formal training in it one day. But for now, I just love experimenting with it.
And I love that you say the conversation, because I notice a lot of art that like I feel drawn to, or I feel is successful, the artist is aware of. This is a conversation either between materials and material, or you and the process and the material, and then also the viewer. And so all of those things, I think, come down to your awareness of what's happening, how you're building these paintings, and that conversation between the shapes, the colors, the materials, the viewer. You're obviously considering all of those things, then make a good recipe for interesting artwork to look at, successful art to look at.
Thank you.
And then, do you see your sociology studies playing a role? And it sounds like you do some of that.
Absolutely.
Just from hearing you talk about it, but I just,
I think so. I mean, I think like anything, right? Like the study of cultural interactions, heritage, social dynamics, that's all, I think, extremely relevant in the arts, and especially for me as a female artist. I would say just contextually, I think my time, even just at Barnard, studying at Barnard, living in Manhattan, studying sociology, even working in finance. I mean, I think there's definitive gender roles that I like to explore in the work. Right now it's largely female-based, but I could see eventually maybe trying to push that forward and maybe starting to abstract more masculine and feminine shapes within the work, and like the duality and the dynamics of that.
Nice. 1 second. Kind of following up with that, how has your process evolved to this point? We've kind of touched on some things you might be considering just there, but then also like what was the last few years looking like for you and your process of developing this narrative and developing this way of painting?
Yeah, I would say, you know, the work started always with voluptuous shapes and biomorphic shapes, playing around with that. I would say over the past 2.5 years, I gained more confidence with expressing my voice with color, and really embracing that and recognizing the power that color has on the canvas. You know, and I've also recently started to dabble in texture and kind of adding a 3-dimensional element to the picture plane. Right now, in this show currently, they're all 2-dimensional paintings. And I do like to create dimensionality in the work. I love to give the impression that a 2-dimensional canvas can look 3-dimensional, but I'm also playing around with building up these canvases with iconic fabrics such as lace, cast and paint, or silk, and kind of seeing what that does to the dialogue with the work. You know, another idea I'm kind of thinking about is also changing just the shape of the work. What would it mean to then translate the work on a circular canvas or an oval canvas, or a biomorphic shape? And so I think over the near future, I would like to maybe explore a sculptural element to the paintings, and see what direction that kind of goes in. That being said, I love to paint. I'm a painter at heart, and I just, you know, ultimately I just love to sit down and paint a canvas.
Yeah.
So, you know.
I think there's a nice tension with your organic shapes and the hard edge, square, rectangular structure of these paintings. So I'm definitely interested to see where those works you just mentioned go and how that gets sort of resolved. But I can see, looking at your pieces, especially this one behind you, that there's texture. You almost want to get away from the flatness of some of the areas and build something physical. And
I do. Like in some of these pieces, which is probably difficult to see virtually, but there is texture and depth created with the thickness of oil paint. So when you are standing up close to the work, you do kind of see like an oscillating plane that isn't maybe as apparent virtually or on a photograph.
I mean, even this treatment here of the fading from light to dark kind of hints at that to me, you know, that there's, you know, this push-pull thing happening too.
The saturation of color for me is so important with creating an atmosphere in the work and creating that physicality that I really enjoy. It's sort of, you know, for me, the goal with a painting is for the viewer to feel within themselves, but to also, whether you feel like you're standing above something looking down, or inside something looking out, or under something looking above, it's really placing the viewer in different kind of perspectives and really atmospheric in that regard. And that's something I really try to pay a lot of attention to when I make these.
And then when you're thinking about these, when you're looking at other art, which is something we talked about, do you have a few artists that are particularly inspiring to you, or is it more so the things in the natural world around you?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of both. You know, definitely with regard to art history, you know, so much of my childhood was spent looking at Georgia O'Keeffe paintings in museums and, you know, flipping through books and doing pastel drawings of the flowers when I was young. And, but yeah, I mean, and I hold you know, much respect for the transcendentalist painters like Agnes Pelton, where there's just such a use of light and form to kind of create this awakening. And so I think a lot of the work is kind of rooted in that nature. But that being said, I mean, I really, the work is harnessed from just really my own response to life, whether it be as a woman, as a mother, in social interactions. There's a dialogue today. Like, there are so many wonderful painters, contemporary painters out there, and sculptors, and it really, I just look at it as my way of expressing myself, really and truly.
And then the title of the show, which is
Yes.
A curious point. If you've never heard the word, which I had not come across that word before, so it was interesting to learn about.
Yeah.
How did that come about? And just
Okay.
I think there's a little bit of a story behind it.
The title enouement. So I came across the title in a reading, and the meaning of the word is sort of the bittersweet notion of arriving in the future and not being able to communicate the outcome to your present self. And I found it very fitting for the time we were living in and the time that I created the body of work. I created these paintings in a condensed period in a very unusual environment, kind of wrought with a lot of fear and uncertainty and melancholy, but yet also feeling somewhat optimistic, and feeling a lot of love, frankly, because all of our family, we were all together, spending a lot of time together, a lot of togetherness. And so it was kind of a funny juxtaposition of emotion, and very kind of volatile too. Like one day feeling one way, the next day sometimes feeling different ways in the same day, And so when I was creating the show, was wondering, what will it look like? I have been to openings before. I had obviously, been to museums, walked into galleries, interacted with work, experienced it in person. So now I'm creating a body of work, and now what will that all look like, And so I was reading something, and a lot of times when I'm making the paintings, I like to sort of look at words that evoke some sort of an emotional or psychological response. And so when I came across enouement, I was like, oh my gosh, that's 100% exactly what I'm going through right now. Like this is just perfect. It encapsulates not just the period of when I was making the work, but it encapsulates showing it and what that means for you and Ryan, and what does that mean, for us all, and not just, gallerists and artists, but everybody. Like, what is our world going to look like in 6 months, 12 months, 24 months? And do we want to know that? Do we want to know that today? Some of us do, some of us, it's kind of like that push and pull of, whether you really want to know the destiny or you don't. And so I found the word to be very poetic, very meaningful, very poignant to the situation that we're all going through. And also this kind of psychological aspect of the paintings where they were kind of created in a period of unknown. But I also I kind of do want the paintings to serve as an awakening of sorts. And so I think it's just all kind of tying that whole theme together.
Yeah, sure. No, I see that comes across with the colors that you're using, and the kind of marks that you're depicting, and the environments, I should say, that you're depicting. Because they're very atmospheric, they're evocative of a place, although they're very dreamscapey, and they just seem like, there's this light within them. And I just want to pan to one painting, which we might not have gotten a good look at recently. So I'll pan to a few just to give you guys a detailed overview. I know Ryan took some time to pan through some while we were talking, but this was a nice one that I don't know if she was able to get. And then you guys saw that one, Bethany, which has been like one of the stars of the show. People really gravitate towards that one and this one. And I love that there's different areas of the painting. Like, you seem to treat, you know,
Yeah.
this is one
That's actually
section.
I'll carry that through. That is
Sure.
one thing I do think about when I paint these. I like to create smaller paintings within a larger painting. So even if you're looking at one corner of the work, I do hope to provide some stimulation in every element of the canvas so that no matter what angle you're looking at it from or where you're looking, that there's enough going on contextually. So I like to kind of call them like mini paintings within paintings. But yeah, that's something I do really like to focus on.
Yeah, no, I think it makes them very complex. You know, they could be simple paintings, and I think that there's just so much to unpack in them. The more time you spend with them, you know, from doing a few studio visits and then from being able to sit here and look at them in person, not just on the computer, and spend some time with them. There's so much subtlety to them, so much complexity, because we were saying they are slow paintings. There's a lot of layers to them, so sometimes these little colors and things kind of peek through a layer, and it doesn't really translate sometimes those subtle, sophisticated details to the photography. And definitely has to the 3D exhibition, you know, the 3D tour of it. You just feel so far away. And so it's been really nice to sit in person with them and just really kind of, you see different things as you sit in with them, because there's one area that I'll grab my eye, will gravitate towards one day, and then the next day something different. So I've been personally really enjoying that about the work since I've been sitting here. So I think we've covered a lot of ground. And then I think there might be some questions, Patty.
So yes, and I'm just going to remind everyone, if you have any questions, please go ahead and send it to us in the chat function. We will be able to read that and we will ask Bethany. The first question I have is, how do you know how much figuration is the right amount? Some of your works are more abstract and some of them have hints of a figure of some kind.
Yeah, that's a great question. So for me, it really is intuitive. You know, there might be a work that is more abstracted and others that are more figurative. And sometimes with me, it's reliant upon the mood I'm in. If I'm wanting to be bolder, more direct with how I'm communicating with the work, then it probably would, you know, I would lean more toward figurative and more figuration. Other times, if I'm just feeling more nuanced and maybe paying more attention to the relationship of colors and movement, they might just turn out to be more abstracted. It's not anything that it's not preconceived. Very rarely is it preconceived. However, with nascents behind us, it's very direct, and it was very direct from the moment I started the painting. You know, a lot of times paintings kind of take on a life of their own, and so, you know, oftentimes like you'll start a work and it will just be very smooth and very quick, and the dialogue goes and it's very figurative, and that's it. There's no way to not make it that way, and you kind of just go down that track. And then there are others that are just more abstract and interpretive, and I love both. I think both are challenging. I think it's challenging to do both successfully. And even my figurative work, it's still quite abstracted, at least I like to think it is. It's not as direct.
Well, because if you turn this painting any other way, this figure is kind of hidden.
Yes.
You know, so I definitely, yeah. But that's, you know, that's the nice thing about the work, and I think it definitely adds to a level of sophistication and interest in that you can go one spectrum or the other. You know, like I think the first paintings of yours that I saw were maybe more atmospheric, abstract.
Yes.
The female topography series might have been something similar to that.
Yeah.
And they definitely play with that, you know.
They do. And I've gotten, I think, more comfortable being more direct too. I think the more you paint, the more time you spend in there with yourself and with the canvases, I think you you get comfortable with your own voice, more comfortable. I don't know if I'll ever be totally comfortable, but you do get more comfortable. And so being bolder, being more direct, being more pointed, it becomes appealing and liberating in a sense.
Great, thank you so much. We have a follow-up question regarding some of the artists who have inspired you. Can you tell us about some other ones aside from Georgia O'Keeffe?
Sure. I would say even like a Helen Frankenthaler and the color field painters really resonate with me. For contemporary painters today, I don't know if maybe that was the question. I'm drawn to so many contemporary artists. Lately, I've been really drawn to artists who utilize color, but in a more tactile way. Sculptor Brian Roquefort out in LA, I love his ceramics. I think they're so luscious and so beautiful. His eye for color is brilliant. To me, they invoke every sense. You want to touch them, you want to taste them, you want to, everything about them, like they're just so beautiful and so well executed. And Jennifer Guidi, I'm a big fan of. I love her very meditative works where she incorporates this very kind of transient use of color, but also sand and integrating a tactile function. I'm trying to think of a few others. I would say most artists that really utilize color well and strongly, I really admire. So I don't know if that answers the question, but those are some more contemporary artists I really look to.
Yes, I think that does answer it. And we have a question for you, Garrett, about the gallery. Do you exclusively show abstract art, or you have a different concept for your gallery?
It's a good mix of figuration and abstract artists. We're not sort of pigeonholed to one or the other. I will say that naturally, my wife and I are both we gravitate towards process-based abstraction. So that's definitely like a strong focus to the program. But that being said, we're also very interested in figurative painters that we feel are doing something different or are somehow very aware of art history and are doing something in a new way or filtering that history through them to make something new. And I feel like, that's certainly true of Bethany's work, where it skirts these boundaries of figuration, abstraction, but also I see so much art history in these. I saw Frankenthaler was the first artist that came to mind when I was looking at your work, and then obviously O'Keeffe, is another one. But yeah, we're not strictly abstract or figurative.
Thank you, Garrett. Our next question is for Bethany. What is the first painting that you completed for the show, and what was the last?
Sure. So the first one, there was one painting that was completed ahead of quarantine. Yeah. And
we'll show it to you guys.
Okay.
Oh, cool. Okay.
So one work, let's see, that Ryan will show. So this painting, Dreaming of Touch, was completed ahead of isolation. And so I just felt it was a really great example of kind of that atmospheric physicality of kind of yearning for something, being in a space. And I really love the painting. So that was when we decided to put it in the show. Passage, which is right above us here, is a great example of a work that was about 80% complete ahead of being in isolation, and I was very lost as to how to finish it. And it sat in my studio for about 6 months, and then in the middle of isolation, I figured it out and completed that work. And then I would say the fastest painting, like the quickest one that came to fruition from start to finish, would be Pollination. This one here is the fastest painting I've ever painted. It took me about 2.5 weeks of voracious painting. With oil paint, it's tricky because every layer needs to dry in between with oil paint. But everything, the stars were aligned with this one, and it was a very quick, rapid painting. And the last painting that I finished for the show is Female Topography 4, and that I finished about 2 weeks before installation. So that was really down to the wire. I know I probably shouldn't tell you guys that.
No, it's okay. That's plenty of time. We have some
yeah,
closer calls.
yeah. But that one was my last most recent completed for the show.
All right, we have time for one last question, and this is about the general exhibition itself and the paintings. So the exhibition features 5 paintings on canvas and 1 work on paper. Can you talk about the difference between painting on canvas and paper? Do you have a favorite?
Yeah, so I'm relatively new to painting on paper. That being said, I've developed a very fond admiration for it quite quickly. You know, I think ultimately I prefer to paint on canvases. However, you know, that being said, there is a great satisfaction of working on paper. Paper grabs oil paint. I use Arches paper, which is for oil paint. And the texture of the paper grabs the paint so beautifully. So it was actually through working on paper that I began to kind of gain a voice for gestural work, because I saw the way that the paper grabs the paint, and I really like that. So then that kind of opened my eye to maybe becoming more gestural with my work on canvas. Also paper, there's a beautiful luminosity to oil paint on paper that I found. I love. So I would say ultimately I love working on canvas, but you will probably see I'm going to start sneaking in more works on paper. They're also liberating in the way that they're quick. So, you know, I can do work on paper in 45 minutes. I can take 2 weeks, depending on, you know, if I want to layer the oil paint, if I don't. It's kind of a beautiful thing. It's really liberating. So it does give me a way of kind of working through ideas rapidly and not feeling so committed. The canvases, they take a lot of time. You know, some of my longer paintings take the better half of 6 months. You know, I would say the average painting, depending on how efficient I am in the studio, probably takes me anywhere from 4 to like 8 weeks, depending on everything, depending on humidity, how fast the oil paint dries, how productive I am, how efficient I am, if I have any sick children, you know, like it kind of all like, if life gets in the way, or if things are just, you know, if the ideas are coming, if I feel a connection to the work at all, there's so many different factors. So yeah, I don't know if that answers the question.
Thank you so much. Yeah. I don't know if you guys have any other closing remarks, last words, but I want to thank everyone here for joining us, and especially to our hosts, Massey Klein Gallery and Bethany Czarnecki.
Thank you, Patty.
Yeah, thank you, Patty.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody that joined us.
For the conversation. It's been great. Really appreciate it.
And we'll follow up with information about the gallery and also Bethany's website, so you can follow along. And we're going to take a program pause for the remainder of the summer. So we hope to see everyone back in the fall. Thank you so much. Have a great day.
Thanks.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.